Well, tonight we're going to study chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9 is the most amazing prophecy in the Bible because it addressed a certain day and the event that was predicted happened on that exact day. And so we're going to look at that.
Somebody sent me a text and messed up your thing.
Why? It's doing that. So, the main title is Unraveling Revelation. We're on part 5, looking at chapters 9 and 10. So in verse 1 of chapter 9, it says, "Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven, a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." Now this star, as we check history, it's not a portion of history that most people study much about, but his name was Chosroes II, and he was king of Persia. And when it says the bottomless pit, it's the basic meaning of what gets translated to that is a wasteland, a place where, things are a mess. And so it represents here the wasteland of Arabia. And as a result of the activity of the Mohammedans, there would be a star fall. The king of Persia, he would fall. And by the way, we studied for the 4 trumpets. This one's the 5th trumpet. The 4 trumpets had to do with the fall of the Roman Empire in the east, with their capital at Rome. Now, we're going to study the fall of Constantinople, which was the 4 trumpets had to do with the Western Empire. And today we're going to study about the Eastern Empire, how it fell. Verse 2, chapter 9, "And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." Now as you know, Revelation has a lot of symbolic language, so we're not talking about literal smoke here. But we're talking about so many soldiers that it's like smoke. It's just covering everything. And we'll see what they're going to do when they come out of that wasteland of Arabia. This was the false religion of Muhammad, or we call them Mohammedans, or now we usually just call them Muslims. And this false religion was to rise to quite a bit of power here at this time. And another symbol in verse 3 says, "And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth." So the smoke illustrates how many, and the locust illustrates the actual army. So they came out of the smoke upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. I don't know if you've ever been bitten by a scorpion, but it's very painful. Even the small ones. One time we were sleeping in a house with no beds. We were just on a mattress on the floor, and I got bitten on my finger by a small scorpion. And that lasted, if I remember right, a couple of weeks. And it was not super painful, but it was really not enjoyable. So this gives us a forecast that they're going to do a lot of damage and bring a lot of pain. Verse 4, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth. I remember some of the conquerors on Western Rome, they burned all the trees, they burned the grass, they did everything to make life hard to live. But the Mohammedans had more respect for nature, and so they would not destroy, they would not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. Now we studied in chapter 7 about the seal of God. And we see that the seal of God has to do with the seventh-day Sabbath. So here we see a very interesting fact, that the Mohammedans liked the Sabbath keepers, but they did not like the Sunday keepers. And so the prophecy says that leave alone the Sabbath keepers, but you can destroy the Sunday keepers. And here is the part of the instructions that the general gave to the Mohammedans as they were going forth to do what this says. He said, destroy no palm trees, nor burn any fields of corn. Cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill to eat. As you go on, you will find some religious persons who live retired in monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone. Why? Because these are Sabbath keepers. Let them alone. And neither kill them nor destroy their monasteries. And you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns. Be sure you cleave their skulls. That's a direct reference to the Catholics who had apparently, in the minds of the Muslims, had acted very un-Christian. They claimed to be Christian, but they were killing people and doing all sorts of evil deeds. And so they said, you wipe them out, but leave the Sabbath keepers alone. It's interesting that history supports what the Bible says would happen. Verse 5, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So during this 5 months, which if we take the Bible principle for prophecy, 1 day equals a year, and we get that from Numbers 14:34, where it says, after the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years. In other words, when God spoke to them about having to turn back into the wilderness, he said, the spies walked throughout the land for 40 days. So I'm going to take every day that they were in the land of Canaan, and it will represent 1 year that you're going to wander in the wilderness. So it became a prophecy. Those 40 days of those spies became a prophecy of what would happen for 40 years. Another one in Ezekiel 4:6, and when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. And then it gives the principle, I have appointed thee each day for a year. So God said to Ezekiel, I want you to lie on your right side for 40 days. And this is going to be a prophecy of what's going to happen to Judah for 40 years. So these two texts unlock the days of Bible prophecy. So then, this 5 months represents 150 years. So for 150 years, the Persians were going to be annoyed. They weren't going to be wiped out. Their capital, which was Constantinople, was not going to be destroyed. But if they were out in the field, all of a sudden the Mohammedans would arrive on horses, and you know, the Arabian horses are known as the best horses in the world. And so they would just ride in and they would plunder, and they would kill some people and so on. And that went on for 150 years. They were tormented. Verse 6. And in those days shall men seek death. So life will be such a burden that a lot of people would rather die than have this happen over and over again. And shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. So the purpose of the Mohammedans was to annoy, but not to kill. Although there were certain people apparently they did want to kill. Verse 7, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses, prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. One of the distinctive features of their soldiers was the turban that they wore on their head. So this is a reference to the turbans that they wore. Verse 8, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. So they wore long hair, which that style seems to come back now and then. But it wasn't the common style in that day, but the Mohammedans wore the long hair. Verse 9, and they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. So you notice again and again horses are mentioned here, because these were soldiers on horses, and they could rapidly come and strike and then rapidly disappear as well. Verse 10, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. So here we see the 150 year of torment, and here's a quote I found. It says, but when did Othman make his first assault on the Greek Empire? According to Gibbon, it was on the 27th of July in the year 1299. So here we have the beginning of the 150 years. It began on the 27th of July in 1299. And that's going to be key because there's two prophecies back to back in this chapter. And so the first prophecy takes us 150 years, and the torment is being conducted by the Mohammedans against the Greek Empire. Now this king, Othman, is also called the angel from the bottomless pit. Here's another quote I found. And their power was to hurt men 5 months. Thus far, their commission extended to torment by constant depredations, but not politically to kill them. So Constantinople stood. They didn't take it. They didn't get rid of those that were leaders of the country. 5 months, which in Bible prophecy it's 30 days to a month, 150 days. That is 150 years reached to 1449. And to be exact, it'd be July 27, 1449. During that whole period, the Turks were engaged in an almost perpetual war with the Greek Empire, but yet without conquering it. So what started out the Mohammedans, it was still the same group of people, but now they center in Turkey, and they have a leader who is interested in doing more than just annoying the leaders in Constantinople. It says they seized upon and held several of the Greek provinces, but still Greek independence was maintained in Constantinople. But in 1449, the termination of the 150 years, a change came, the history of which will be found under the succeeding trumpet. So we've come basically to the end of the 5th trumpet, and we're going to start into the 6th trumpet. I don't think I read 11. It says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. That was Othman. And he formed what was called the Ottoman Empire, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, or Abaddon. No, it's Abaddon. But in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. So they gave quite a few different identifying things, but Othman fits all of those. Then verse 12 says, one woe is past. You remember when we came to the end of chapter 8, it said, look out, there's 3 woes to come. In other words, they'll be worse than the things that have already happened in chapter 8. So one woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. So now we're going to look at the 6th trumpet. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. Now the golden altar, of course, is in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, and just on the other side of the curtain, the altar of incense was on one side of the curtain in the holy place, and the Ark of the Covenant was in the most holy place just on the other side of the curtain. And so it seemed like God's voice was coming from the altar of incense, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now, here, in the book of Revelation, sometimes when it says angel, it means a literal angel, but the basic meaning is simply messenger. So, in this case, it's not literal angels, but 4 human beings. And here's a note about who they were. These are the 4 principal sultans of which the Ottoman Empire was composed, located in the country watered by the Euphrates. So it helps us locate where is this power coming from that's going to inflict the 6th woe, or the 2nd woe. It's coming from the Euphrates area. Verse 15, and the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. Now remember when we studied the destruction of Western Europe, it was a 3rd that were going to be destroyed. Now we're looking at the Eastern Empire, and another 3rd is going to be destroyed by the Ottoman Empire. Here's a note I found. Late in the year 1448, as the close of the 150-year period approached, Constantine, the lawful successor, would not venture to ascend the throne without the consent of the Turkish Sultan. So, in other words, they recognized their inferiority to the Ottoman Empire, which was in what we call Turkey. And he said, I'm not going to become king over the Greek Empire unless he agrees over there that I can do it, which shows their weakness. This was not a violent assault made on the Greeks, by which their empire was overthrown and their independence taken away, but simply a voluntary surrender of that independence into the hands of the Turks by saying, I cannot reign unless you permit. And so the Turkish leader said, yes, you can. And so he took the leadership. Now this time prophecy is a very interesting one. If you figure out how much would 1 hour be worth, it comes out to 15 days. And of course, 1 day equals 1 year, a month equals 30 years, and a year equals 360 years. So if you add those up, we have a time prophecy here in verse 15 of 391 years and 15 days. In other words, the Turks will control. They started out controlling by a voluntary submission on the part of the Greeks, but it didn't stay that way, as we're going to read. And so that power over them would exist for 391 years and 15 days. Here's another history note. Amurath, the sultan to whom the submission of Decosus was made, and by whose permission he reigned in Constantinople, soon after died, and was succeeded in the empire in 1451 by Muhammad II. Now he's going to have different ideas. The other one name was Decosus. He said, yes, you can reign. But Muhammad says, who set his heart on Constantinople and determined to make it a prey. he accordingly made preparations for besieging and taking the city. The siege commenced on the 6th of April, 1453, and ended in the taking of the city and the death of the last of the Constantines on the 16th day of May following. And the eastern city of the Caesars became the seat of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire moved their capital to Constantinople. For 150 years, they just annoyed them. But then when Muhammad II came along, he wanted to destroy their power completely, and so he conquered the city of Constantinople. Now, as we're going to read, there was a new invention that made it possible for him to do that. Otherwise, he never would have been able to conquer that city. It was practically impregnable. Now we go to verses 16 and 17. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them. Now apparently, those that have studied the Revelation, this is a little bit of a mystery. They question that he had 200 million soldiers. But he had a huge number of soldiers, for sure. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth, and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire, and smoke, and brimstone. This was one of the first battles in which cannons and rifles were used. And it was the cannons especially that broke through the walls of Constantinople. They knocked down a whole section by constant bombardment and were able to take the city. But, of course, the prophet doesn't know anything about guns, and so the prophet pictures this as a horse running along and the fire's coming out of his mouth because the gun, is shooting from the rider. Verses 18 and 19. By these three was the third part of men killed. See, they were tormented during 150 years. Now they're going to be killed. By the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. Now the reason why it mentions their tails is that was one of the standards that they had. They were proud of their horses, and they had this as a standard. So it pictures their power came from their tails and from their mouth, which was the gunfire. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. Now let's take a look at this, these two prophecies together. We already noted that July 27, 1299 was the beginning of the 150 years. So if we go exactly 150 years, it brings us to July 27, 1449. And during that time, the Muslim world tormented the Christian world, which would actually be the apostate Christian world. You see, one of the messages of this chapter is that God uses a false religion to punish those who claim to have the true religion, but they don't. And so they in a sense, are more righteous than the apostate Christians. Now, I have a hunch. I don't have, much proof. But I have a hunch that the same thing is going to happen again after the close of probation. That the Muslim world is going to be used by God again to punish apostate Christians who want to kill the Sabbath keepers. And they're not going to want to kill the Sabbath keepers. They're going to want to kill the Sunday keepers, just like they did back here during this time. That may or may not happen, but I just have a hunch, why would this prophecy only apply to something so long ago in a book that's talking about the last days? But anyway, I've never seen anybody make that claim, so. Then we have immediately the next time period, 391 years and 15 days. So, that would start July 27, 1449, and would extend to August 11, 1840, when the Muslim world surrendered to the Christian world. And here's where the most amazing thing happens. Right during the Millerite movement, when William Miller and those that had joined him were preaching that Jesus was going to come in 1843, and the Holy Spirit was giving their movement tremendous power, and people were making decisions for or against this message. One of their pastors, Joshua Himes, studied out this prophecy, and he said, in August, the Turkish Empire is going to fall. And just a few days before it happened, he said the Turkish Empire is going to fall on August 11th. Now, you can imagine people would be watching to see if what he said was true or not. And if it was true, it would give a lot of credibility to the Millerite movement. Well, here's what happened. At the very time specified, Turkey, through her ambassadors, accepted the protection of the Allied powers of Europe, and thus placed herself under the control of Christian nations. So the document that surrendered to England and the Christian nations was signed August 11, 1840, on the very day that had been predicted way back 2,000 years almost before that time. Then we finish up our chapter, verses 20 and 21. It says, "And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold, and silver and brass and stone, and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk." That's a frequent statement in the Old Testament. Why would you want to worship an idol? They can't see anything. They can't talk. They can't give you any help. Why would you want to serve them? Serve me, the Creator. I'm the one that can do things for you. Well, unfortunately, the Catholic Church did not learn their lesson from the punishment that God allowed to happen to them. God loved the Catholics. He wanted, really, for them to turn around and become true Christians again. But the Bible says even after all of this, They didn't make any change. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. So no change in spite of all that. And if that prophecy happens again, we know there won't be any change either, because it's after the close of probation. Nobody changes after that. Now chapter 10. And it's very interesting. The events of chapter 10 are talking about the year 1844. And the events of chapter 9 end with August 11, 1840. Obviously, if you're looking at the chronology here, there's only one way that we can interpret chapter 10, and that is to do with the Millerite movement. So in chapter 10, it starts out, verses 1 and 2. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. So here we do have a heavenly messenger coming down. And he had in his hand a little book open. And he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth. Now the little book that he had in his hand was the little book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is a very small book, only a few pages. It's a tremendous book, though, and we'll study that again in the fall here. We did last fall. And here is an interesting statement from Daniel, chapter 12, verse 4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. So after writing the book of Daniel, the very last chapter, God instructs him, seal up this part of the book. Don't let people understand this part of the book till the last days. When the last days come, then it's going to be open. Notice the angel is coming down with the book open now. It was closed back then, but now it's going to be open. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. In other words, many people will be studying their Bibles, looking back and forth to understand the symbols, and they'll be turning the leaves of the Bible back and forth, figuring out. And that's exactly what William Miller and those that joined him were doing. And they were preaching the things that they found in the book of Daniel, especially the prophecy in chapter 8, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Then, in verse 3 and 4, and cried with a loud voice as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Now in the last part of verse 2 and verse 3, it's talking about the worldwide message. And actually, Miller's writings and his presentations went to every mission station in the entire world. It was headquartered in the United States, but it was a worldwide movement. That's why the angel had 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land, because it was going to go everywhere, and it was going to go with a loud voice, which means the Holy Spirit attended the message. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered, and write them not. Now this to me is an interesting verse, why God would reveal some things to him and then tell him you can't write it down. But I'm sure there's a good reason for that. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. In other words, we come to the end of prophetic time in this chapter. The longest prophecy in the Bible is the 2300-day prophecy, which extended to October 22, 1844. After 1844, on October 22, there is no Bible prophecy that tells the exact time of any event. And the reason for that is that the coming of Jesus is not based upon any time prophecy. It is based upon when people of earth are ready. Whenever he sees that it's the right time, that's when he will come. There's no prophecy now. People try to hatch up still some figures of when he's going to come, or approximately when he's going to come. But it's a waste of time, because the Bible says that there shall be time no longer. Verse 7. I don't think I had any more, no. I got too many things going and I didn't get it all on slides, but we'll read the rest here. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. Now it doesn't explain the seventh trumpet in this chapter, but it mentions it, that when he would begin to sound, the mystery of God will be finished. And the Bible identifies the mystery of God as Christ in you, the hope of glory. So it's talking about, no doubt, the 144,000 who will become like Jesus. They have learned to connect so fully to Jesus that God is able to reproduce his character fully in them. And so we'll take that up later in chapter 11, verse 15, actually, is when that is brought up again. And the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. So it's like the Lord said to William Miller and later to others, the book is open now. You can study it and you can find out what it's talking about. And they did. They studied faithfully that book and figured out much of what was in the book. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. So as Miller and others studied and felt that Jesus was coming on October, well, eventually, there were several steps, but eventually realized it was October 22, 1844. What a sweet message it was. They were eager to be able to go home with Jesus. They were so happy and joyful that they could warn the world about his coming. It was a very, very sweet message. But when he didn't come on October 22, oh, how sad they were. They wept all night. They didn't know what had happened, why Jesus didn't come. Prophecies were very clear. They knew the date was right. Well, within a couple of days, God revealed he changed from the holy place to the most holy place on October 22, 1844, but he didn't come to the earth. Now, a lot of people criticize Seventh-day Adventists, call us false prophets because of saying that Jesus was going to come, but he didn't come. But they don't criticize the disciples for thinking that Jesus was going to be crowned king, and when he was nailed to the cross, they wept and they wept and they wept because they expected him to be king. Here he was dead. So apparently, God purposely allows his people to be fooled. Now, they don't have to. If they'd studied the Bible better, they would have understood that Jesus was coming to die. But they didn't understand that, and so they had a terrible disappointment. And the Adventists shouldn't be criticized any more than the disciples for the disappointment that they had. But later, they recognized that, we know where Jesus is now. He's moved into the most holy place for the final work, getting ready for his second coming.
And with both groups, it was a matter of education. It's the way they had been trained.
Yes. Yeah, the schools and the leaders of the nation taught them that the Messiah was going to be made king. And actually, the Protestant churches are at fault for the misunderstanding of the Millerites, because the churches taught that that the earth was the sanctuary, and when the earth was going to be cleansed, it meant Jesus was going to come and burn it with fire. So they had accepted that. They were in the Methodist Church and the Baptist Church and all these churches, and that's what they taught. And so they had, from their youth, if they were Christian anyway, they had learned that. Just like the Jews had learned Jesus is coming to be king. So it's an identical mistake. Okay, then verse 10. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey, and as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. Now, one of the most powerful parts of this chapter is to prove that the disappointment that the Millerites experienced was ordained of God, because the Bible had predicted it nearly 2,000 years before it happened. You're going to be disappointed. Now, they didn't understand that chapter until afterward. And afterward, they started noticing, God predicted that we would get disappointed. And it happened exactly like the Bible said. We loved the message of Jesus coming. And then he didn't come, and it was so sad. This has been exactly our experience predicted in Revelation chapter 10. And he said unto me, Thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. In other words, the message of Daniel had two times when it was to be preached. First time before 1844, leading up to that time, and then the disappointment and understanding why they were disappointed, and they realized we still have to preach that the sanctuary is to be cleansed, but it's a different cleansing than what we thought. It's the heavenly sanctuary. And the heavenly sanctuary gets cleansed by each name that passes in the judgment, and then when their name passes, their sins could be taken out of the sanctuary, and thus the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary. And eventually, the last group to have their sins brought out will be the 144,000. And when everybody's sins are brought out of the sanctuary, then probation will close, and the list of those that can go to heaven will be fixed and settled at that point. So, we are supposed to be giving this message again to all the world, not just, in this country, but to the entire world.